shifted from being one about the tool for innovation and economic development to being one about national security and resilience.
The EU made an announcement on the 24th of June 2025 that stated,
My guidance would be to start at your important business services or your critical systems. Understand where your long-lived data is.
This is a wave. In fact, it's not a wave, it's a tsunami that's heading towards us.
Problem. I think we all know the risk of, steal now, decrypt later is happening, and leaders need to kind of focus on.
It's not about vendors anymore. It's about, do you have control over the cryptographic assets? Do you have control of those keys?
Okay, I'll kick off. Welcome everyone to our online event today. Trust isn't a strategy, the sovereignty shift in a post-quantum world. So I'm Tom Miller, the founder and CEO here at Venari Security, and I'd just like to say thank you for everyone who's attended, and I'd like to start by saying a massive thank you to all my speakers that are here today. So we're blessed with an extraordinary array of talent with Paddy, Adrian, Francis, Bryan and Spencer. So thank you all for supporting this event and Venari on what is now a very now topic, especially after this week's visit from President Trump. It certainly seems like we're not on the naughty step, at least. So that's a good thing. And I see that Paddy's got his American flag cup out today. So I'm sure that's there's going to be some story in that somewhere along the line. But thank you again for coming. To that end, the geopolitical tensions since the Trump administration started, to pretty much shake up the system, relationships, the tariffs that affected the supply chains that we all, absolutely rely upon to do business. The continued disruption and uncertainty has led to a real big shift in focus on who do we work with, who do we trust, and what decisions can we make if we have a choice. So quantum computing and the market for post-quantum cryptography, which is the market that we're in, and it has emerged as a direct result of the quantum, what I call the threat horizon. And I call it the horizon because no one really knows how far away the thing we call Q-Day is, but for sure, I think it's as close as it's sort of ever been. So my personal belief is that, it's closer than we think. The constant and seismic changes and advancements in technology will deliver what some in the industry are calling these things called Q panic days, which are the sort of things like advancement announcement events to the public that make more and more people take note of the risks that are definitely coming along. So to that end, the EU made an announcement on the 24th of June 2025 that stated that all EU CNI needed to have migrated to quantum safe cryptography by 2030. And for all of us in the industry, I think we know that that's probably not achievable, but at least it's given a big lift to many organizations to commence their plans, or at least to create plans, and the ones that had plans to action them. I think this is only a good thing, and I think we're, considering what we observe inside modern organizations, I think the transformation will take a lot longer and a lot more time than people have expected. So preparation is everything, and as the sort of saying goes, if you fail to prepare, you're going to definitely should prepare to fail. So we hope there's a lot of preparation that's going on out there as a result of what's happening, announcements in the industry and so forth. So strategic decisions over technology in critical areas is really, really important, with encryption being foundational to everything we do, every financial transaction, around the globe. It's critical to operational resilience, business resilience, in fact, to the whole global systems resilience. So at Venari, we try to do one thing very, very well, and that's cryptographic asset discovery. And we provide continuous monitoring, reporting on continuous compliance against those standards. And more importantly, or just one thing that's important about what we do is we capture the metadata of encrypted sessions in real time. And part of which is reporting on communications vulnerabilities. So your encryption vulnerabilities. So I think if you had a choice that you might not want to have or be accessible by a nation state or any adversary, and these are very strategic and important choices if you can make them. So Today, Venari is, as far as we're aware, the only company in the UK that's doing what we do, and one of only 3 in the EU. And therefore, for us, sovereignty and the agenda around it is a very important one. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Spencer, who's going to run the session. And again, I'd like to thank you all for taking time out of your very busy diaries to attend this session, which is recorded. So over to you, Spencer. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks, Tom, and thanks to Venari for bringing this really important topic to the fore. It's certainly worthy of a discussion, and we've got the right people around the table to talk about this. So trust isn't a strategy in a post-quantum world, right? Just to repeat what Tom said. But before I start, just a very warm welcome to our audience, for those of you that signed up for this session and those that you're going to listen to it subsequently. It's a big number of attendees, but I do think we have the right people here to do it justice. So my name is Spencer Mott. I'm going to be your moderator today, the panel moderator. Hopefully everyone's going to behave themselves, but we're going to have a good topic and discussion. So as Tom said, this is a wave. In fact, it's not a wave, it's a tsunami that's heading towards us. Now, as a technology executive and as a leader over the years, one thing that with transformations, you at least had a little bit of time to prepare and they were somewhat predictable. But I think now with as Tom mentioned, with the influence of geopolitical and kind of world events that have moved from pendulum to kind of whipsaw type actions, we went from being able to manage mainframe to distributed, mobile computing, cloud, Y2K, social media. We kind of took it in our stride. But what's coming on the horizon really needs preparation now, and that's what we're going to talk about. What it is, why we need to prepare and think about it, and how we can put ourselves in the best position to not only get through what's going to be required, but to be a leader and a winner, because there's no doubt there's going to be losers. This isn't a topic that can be ignored or put to one side. So getting straight on, just to welcome my esteemed panel. So Paddy McGuinness, a very famous individual, in fact, former UK Deputy National Security Advisor. Adrian Neal, he's the global post-quantum cryptographic lead at Capgemini. Francis Gorman, who's the principal security architect at Bank of Ireland. Thank you. Welcome, Francis. Bryan Littlefair, who's a cyber advisor to the chairman at Legal & General, ex-CISO, Vodafone, Aviva, from the Hall of Fame of CISOs, Bryan. And we're going to debate sovereignty shift and the post-quantum future. So without further ado, Paddy, I'm going to start on you if you don't mind. Can you just share how geopolitical tensions are influencing the formation of strategy that nations and enterprises, so businesses, use to achieve digital sovereignty in the quantum era? Big question. Over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And wonderful to be with you all today and to have the chance to talk about this. If I may, I want to remove that word tensions for a moment, because I want you to understand the real shape of this, because it's really important as we get deeper into the discussion that you understand the nuances. This isn't only about confrontation, it's also about individual states wanting autonomy. And it's very noticeable that the discourse, the public discourse, and in private, the national security discourse about quantum has shifted from being one about a tool for innovation and economic development to being one about national security and resilience. And that's evident in private when I'm with people talking about it, but it's also explicit. It's explicit in the 2025 Strategic Defence Review from the UK, and also in the European Chips Act, where there are kind of elements that show that there's a real interest in sovereignty and defining where sovereignty lies. Now, classically, that's caught up, and Tom rather did it, because we think about the way in which, particularly under the first Trump administration and since, there's been the instrumentalization of certain frontier technologies in the competition with China. Some would argue the conflict with China. So that's AI, that's a whole load of data science stuff, but it's also quantum, absolutely. And that's right, that is a driver. But also there's an increasing determination for individual nation states that are friends with each other, so between the European Union and the United States, but also within the European Union, to have a high degree of autonomy and to have domestic capability in hardware, in software and cryptography, so they genuinely have some form of autonomy. Now, the EU stresses that as being open strategic autonomy, which means that they're both prepared to have kind of shared technology development across borders and with the United States and the United Kingdom and others, but also trying to wean themselves off their cloud dependency on the US and some other dependencies on the larger US vendors. And the UK, after Brexit, has had these kind of pockets that it's built up around AUKUS with Australia and the US, around the partnership with Japan and Italy around GCAP, future fighter aircraft, and various other areas where you've got these pools of sharing approaches to these frontier technologies, but at the same time, an underlying determination to maintain some elements sovereign, and particularly when you get into cryptography. And this had, I think, profound implications when one thinks about industrial strategy, because you've got explicit strategies like the Defence Industrial Strategy published by the US just on the 8th, UK rather, on the 8th of September, which has quantum running through it. Quantum runs through it both as something to enable future warfighting, but also being quantum ready as an element that you need within your industrial supply chain, whether it's international or domestic. And so there's a kind of balance of, if we're going to fight with this, you know, how are we going to defend ourselves? And enterprises are being nudged in the EU by public procurement rules and R&D funding towards using trusted quantum, which in practice means and cryptographics, which in practice means European suppliers or European approved suppliers. And the UK's National Quantum Strategy of 2023 talks extensively about domestic supply chain resilience. So when we think about this, this isn't only about conflict, this is also about being autonomous when dealing with your friends, which means that every nation state is going to be doing something about this. Back to you.
Paddy, excellent. Thank you for that. I know there's two things there that when I used to sit in the CISO chair, it scared me to death. One was touching crypto with certs and ciphers, etc. And the other thing was, you know, what we now have to face is how on earth do you unpick data into a sovereign enclave? You know, bear in mind that data operates almost like a liquid format. So Adrian, over to you. You have a very detailed academic perspective on this, as well as a practical one at Capgemini. What practical steps can organizations take to establish national cryptographic sovereignty frameworks, and how might these differ between the EU and UK contexts?
Good question. I think you're going to be starting with public key infrastructure. That's really where many systems hang their security on. It can be found in almost any device now, any piece of software. It permeates everywhere throughout an organization. And it forms the basis for your trust relationships with other organizations. So basically, you know, any communications between, say, bank A and bank B is going to be because, well, you've just exchanged certificates. So it seems to be the basis for all of our trust within, from organization to organization and internally. That, I think, is where you're going to start. That's your backbone of trust, if you like. If you outsource that, if someone else is running that, you don't have control over that, and that's going to become an issue. That's going to be there. I mean, in the past, it was simply a case of, oh well, we've outsourced it to this vendor. We don't like what they're doing, or they're changing things. We're going to have to go to another vendor. It's not about vendors anymore. It's about, do you have control over the cryptographic assets? Do you have control of those keys? But it goes further. It's not just about things like keys and HSMs or how you manage them. It's, so what happens when something stops working? Do you have the source code? Well, actually, HSMs don't have source code as such, but if the HSM isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing, if it doesn't work, do you currently have a relationship with the country where they are supplying it? You know, maybe there's a change of government. Maybe all of a sudden, what you thought was a nice trusted partnership where you can just get support, that's no longer an option. And that's the sort of thinking that we never thought we have to do. Right? We never thought. I hate to say the term, we never thought we'd come to this, but actually it has. We are in a situation where today, my HSM vendor lives in a country where they're my allies. Will that be the same tomorrow? I used to be able to say, of course. I'm not sure I can now. And that really, really changes your fundamental relationship of everything you do in terms of software sourcing and so forth. And things like PKI, you'll probably have lots of them. You probably have certificates all over the place. Your internal CAs, your software from various varieties of sources, maybe some open source, but you may be using external certificate providers. Think of the VeriSigns, the GoDaddy, there are public sources whereby, wherever they may be, but they're not under your control. And I haven't even begun to think about how does that work with root authorities. Am I only going to trust certain root authorities in my browser now and actually not trust others? It's going to come to that. Yeah, I think it is. So yes, that's where it begins. That's what it's all about. And it permeates to everything that sort of touches PKI, because that's your backbone.
Yeah, so Adrian, listening to you speak, one thing that comes out of that is a lot of the traditional language and mechanisms with PKI or certificate authorities, they're still around, but this is a massive change. If you're a CIO, probably equivalent to an ERP swap out, et cetera, et cetera. So big change. So Francis, you're on the very front line of all this. You're at the Bank of the Island, a very well-known banking name, $160 million of assets being managed. Should post-quantum readiness be treated as a compliance obligation? How do you think about it? Or is it something else?
Great question, Spencer. So I suppose quantum at the moment, I look at it as operational and resilience necessity more so than a compliance requirement. If we look past the vendor landscape and we look at the guidance coming out of the European Union in terms of its quantum readiness roadmap, or the NCSC in the UK, they're all saying the same things in terms of timeline. You need to start building your inventory now, so you know where your cryptographic assets are, and you need to start your pilots and preparation for your migration paths. And they're all pivoting towards finished high risk by around 2030 and on all exposures by 2035. And that's give or take about a 9-year window. In the technology landscape, 9 years goes by pretty quickly, and the complexity of this is deep. When I look at this, I think there's a couple of strategies that enterprises need to lean into, and that's to understand your important business systems or your critical business systems now. And you don't necessarily need tooling to do this. You just need to know where they are, what they do, and which one of them have long-lived data that may be susceptible to harvest now and decrypt later type attacks, or susceptible to a quantum relevant computer coming before the timeline that has been laid out. You need to understand what those systems are and understand their architectural dependencies so that you can do something about them. And then you need to start in the background building your cryptographic inventory, top down, bottom up. And what a lot of organizations are yet to realize, and we're seeing it as we map out our dependencies, is you're going to have an awful lot of problems as you hit middleware services like routers, switches, etc., where the bit size of the new quantum resistant algorithms may topple those. You may have third parties that hand off certain part of your workload. Are they implementing their quantum readiness programs, etc.? So the complexity here is quite deep, and you need to start somewhere. So my guidance would be to start at your important business services or your critical systems. Understand where your long-lived data is, where you have exposures, either between third-party entities or to the internet. For example, if you have banking apps that are public-facing, they're going to have a long tail in terms of making them cryptographic resilient, because you can't turn on post-quantum resistant algorithms now and break all of your customer journeys. So you're going to have to come up with strategies to navigate that. And I think it's really important that knowledge is key here. And the better you know your systems, the better you know your data, the better you know the cryptography that underpins that data and the architectural dependencies that surround that data, the better prepared you will be for a quantum era.
Great. I'm going to sneak in a cheeky question there, but how important is to phone a friend because you're down the path of this, you're already kind of preparing and doing your inventory or cryptographic bill of materials, but how's important to have partners or advisors in relation to this, whether it's Venari or from the technological and discovery side, or is it something you can go alone with?
So I think it's absolutely not something you can go alone with. I think quantum needs a community, and there's quite a good community there already. I think awareness at the moment is key, but we need to start your journey by 2026 and start understanding what you need, because you're going to find skill gaps. You're going to find, actually, we need to build a quantum or cryptographic center of excellence. We need to upskill some of our resources. We don't fully understand what that system is. Or the guys that maintain that code base left 10 years ago. Oh, that's an entire ecosystem that needs to be upgraded over there. So all this needs to be costed for, and it's complex, it's complicated. You're going to need relevant skills. You're going to need the right level of knowledge, and you're going to need to lean into others that have hit these problems across the road. So I think building the quantum community and sharing lessons learned is key to success here.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you just reminded me, 2026, September 2025, kind of a reminder of how quickly we need to start preparing seriously. Bryan, you've been a CISO at some very, very large companies, including telcos. You now advise boards. How urgent is we have Y2K, now we've got Y2Q, thank you. How urgent is it for policymakers, security leaders, technology executives and business leaders? What's the sense of urgency here?
Yeah, so it's good you said Y2K, because obviously Y2Q is here now, years to quantum. I mean, not a significant amount happened in Y2K, but I don't think we're going to have that luxury with Y2Q, right? So I think, Spencer, in my personal view, it's not as urgent as it should be. We look at the conferences that state they're all about the future of cybersecurity, and you look through the agenda, we're still talking about seams and breaches and endpoint, etc. You'd be hard pressed to find quantum on the agenda for CISOs coming up. So it's definitely something that we need to focus on. I don't think that, as Tom mentioned, there's a notional 2030 deadline. This isn't something that we can start to think about in 2030. I look back to things like GDPR and the impact that had on organizations. And, my advice is, find your experts now, the people who are, focused on this, because the cynic in me says, like GDPR, every consultant and every services business is about to become a quantum expert, but do they really have the pedigree to back that up? I think, the quantum risk is real today. I think the adversaries already know that. I don't think Y2Q is a long-term problem. I think we all know the risk of, steal now, decrypt later is happening, and leaders need to kind of focus on that. It's a present day priority. All the threat intelligence we see coming through, we see, adversaries specifically targeting encrypted data. They don't care if it's encrypted at the moment, because in a post-quantum world, they'll have the ability to decrypt that. So we call that, harvest now, decrypt later, and they'll hoover up everything that they can. And there's obviously reason and rationale for that. We have long-lived sensitive data, PII data, legal records, medical, government, business IP, etc. It doesn't really matter if that's decrypted now, in 5 or 10 years. It's still going to be extremely valuable to organizations, or extremely personal to individuals. A sensitive medical procedure you had 5-10 years ago is still going to be important to you as an individual, and the same as IP and PII for organizations. It's still going to be wrapped up in regulation and legislation. So if they've got access to that and the ability to decrypt it, then it's still going to be important to organizations to protect that going forward. And we see that, as Paddy touched on, regulation, national strategies coming out from countries around the world. They're urging us to put immediate focus on, in getting your inventory ready, getting the planning ready, getting things in place. So getting that organizational view, so getting the board aligned, getting to recognize the risk, putting in a timeline for that migration away from, what you potentially call legacy crypto algorithms to the future in terms of NIST approved PQC algorithms, etc. But I really think, the first step for organizations is to make sure that the security leadership recognize this as something they've got to focus on. Then they've got to have the conversation with the business. But, I've worked with Tom and Venari for many years. And, the first step that I see organizations is as we've touched upon, is discovering, where cryptography lives within your organization, because it's going to be within your apps, your firmware. You're going to have stipulations within contracts. And how do you actually classify that crypto use, and how do you plan for that future hybrid transition that you're going to have to put in place for that, post-quantum world? I think, all too often security teams see an encrypted flow and they kind of move on. But actually, there's lots of different handshakes, lots of different algorithms, some appreciated that might be within that encrypted flow. So you can't just see an encrypted traffic flow and go, that's secure. It might be encrypted. Yes. Is it secure? It may not be, because that handshake might be really low. And it certainly won't be secure in a post-quantum world. So personally speaking, I don't see this topic high enough on security leaders' agendas at the moment, but it absolutely should be. So over to you, Spencer.
A board's asking about it, Bryan.
Yes, I think they are, only because of the national guidance that's coming out. So they're certainly asking the question, or starting to ask the question. But 2030 is still a long way away from them. I think the guidance needs to be crisped up, and certainly it's, as I said earlier, it's disappointing that we have cybersecurity conferences that aren't putting this on the agenda, because I think it's very topical, right? So
yeah, great segue back to Paddy, actually. And Paddy, I'm going to hit you with a tsunami of questions, as much as you can answer it. Question number one is, what we typically seen with new technologies, especially as ones, and in the current context as well, that the leap forward in terms of capability, that technology might be managed or enabled for a government to use for a number of years before it becomes mainstream. But it feels like everything's really speeding up. So I don't know whether that's true in this case. And if it is true, how long, or is it already here, a capability of, maybe an adversary nation state? That's the first part of the question. And then we talked a lot about crypto, which is, almost a technology leading thing. It's certificates, it's ciphers, it's, it's protocols, certificate authorities, etc. But sovereignty is really to liquid form of data. And China's probably, if you look at China, WeChat, TikTok, and everything, they were able, in a way, to kind of repatriate and take control of data with equivalent services to Facebook or Microsoft. So question one is, do governments likely have this, or will have it soon, in terms of a cryptographic offensive capability? And two is, where do you start with trying to unpick data to make it sovereign and repatriate it?
So small questions you're asking me there. Small questions. Look, I want to try and just draw this together. And clearly, in a way, I'm speaking for what states and what signals intelligence capable states are thinking about, which is driving some of the agenda. But there's something really important that comes out of what Francis and Bryan were describing in terms of the operational consequence of issues with the integrity of your cryptology. And it's worth saying that those questions that Francis and Bryan were talking about come at a time where there's a definite shift from concern about access to data to operational resilience. And if you think about the major events that we've had this year, and some in the past, but this year in particular, for instance, in the UK, so one thinks of, I don't know, a Co-op or a Marks and Spencer's, or one thinks of a Jaguar Land Rover going on at the moment. Frankly, no one really cares that much about whether or not my customer data is gone. What they care or not is whether or not the West Midlands is going to be employed. And so there's a great focus on the integrity of the systems to deliver their operational effect. And my word, as we know, if something goes wrong in the banking arena, and we've watched it, you think of Ulster Bank and the rest of it, it's of great consequence. So you've got that strand, and that, of course, is about national resilience and national security. So even before we get into the stuff around sovereignty, you've got a current driver, which I think is on the move. You've got DORA, which has come in within Europe, which we're all dealing with. You've got a cybersecurity and resilience bill coming into Parliament, which may yet be filled out to do more things in the UK. So that's that column coming, and it's coming at us, and progressively it'll be interested in the areas we've been talking about today. And then I think when you begin to think about when will we have, if you like, quantum capability that is impacting target systems as a nation state. Tom's right about the horizon. It's been noticeable that horizon has come in, and the British National Cybersecurity Centre and its chief technology officer was a bit kind of sanguine about it and said, oh yeah, 2040s. And now you see it coming forward, and the concept of coming forward. And I think there's something really interesting if we compare it about artificial intelligence. So you think about, we've been talking about artificial intelligence. It's, there's work been going on in universities elsewhere. We've had machine learning. We now have large language models delivered at scale, which are far from perfect, as we all know. But that moment when we went from pre-LLM availability to post-LLM availability was a major breakthrough, even though we're not at AGI, we're not at full artificial intelligence. And I think we need to think of quantum in those terms. And there are others on the call, noticeably Adrian, who can speak about this with proper technological depth. But I think we need to think about when will it begin to have effect. And what we're seeing at the moment, I think, is a realization on the part of signaled intelligence capable nation states. So in the European Union, France, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, to some extent, the UK very much so, obviously the United States, Canada, the Five Eyes, and China, Russia, and various others. Yeah, that they can see when it would come in and they could see what it might do. So it isn't that we're yet at the point where it's applied, but they can begin to perceive when it will become operationally useful, which is driving the agenda that we're now seeing from nation states. And so then you begin to talk about, yes, the operational factors that Francis was talking about and the way in which you'd look at those and prepare for those and be really thoughtful. But also increasingly, you're going to have a sovereignty impact assessment where there's going to be an expectation that you will understand both yourselves and within your supply chain. Where are my algorithms developed? Where is my hardware manufactured? And what are the physical vulnerabilities that may be exploited within it? And what jurisdictions control my vendors that they may be able to force through law access to aspects of the algorithmic development, or hardware development, which caused me concern. And you're beginning to see, and because of that loose horizon, I better shut up in a moment, but because of that loose horizon that Tom was talking about, you aren't getting big bits of legislation because we don't know yet, just like we're not on AI really getting big bits of legislation. But the individual regulators, whether it be the, poor Francis, the ECB or the FCA, and indeed increasingly people like Ofgem and others, are beginning to push through, using their regulatory powers without a special piece of legislation, a requirement to understand that sovereignty aspect as opposed to just the operational aspect. So that's all coming at us. I think on your question about data, I think where we're going to get to, in fact, I think already we are in a position where there's an acceptance that there's going to be a massive pooling of data. Of course there is, and that has already happened. And either we may not have wanted that, but it has happened. There's nothing much we can do about it at this point. Or actually it doesn't matter very much because those are not going to be the core services that we need to deliver. But increasingly, control of the protection of those core services, which will include the finance sector, and telecommunications, energy, the classic things that are at the top of the national risk register in the United Kingdom and national security strategy. Increasingly, there'll be a focus on the cryptological protection of those and the integrity of the underlying systems that manage those, so that if you do find yourself in a warfighting situation, you are able to draw back into your own or allied protections and have some confidence that those data sets, including operational technology data sets, can be protected. I hope I'm not being too wary.
No, you're not at all. And you surfed my tsunami perfectly there. It didn't sweep you away. I should try harder next time, but thank you. A little bit of a light bulb moment there in terms of the intersection between cryptography and data sovereignty is the way you architect your crypto is going to help you with your data sovereignty issues in terms of access, hosting, etc., etc. So Adrian, what aspects of digital infrastructure and key management are most critical for ensuring cryptographic independence during any post-quantum cryptographic transition or transformation?
This control of the infrastructure. Do you control the infrastructure, the cryptographic infrastructure for your organization? And I'm thinking in terms of, if we look at nationally what's going on, I'm drawn to the INQ acquisition last week, the final approval of the acquisition. What was it? Was it Oxford Ionics? I think it was Oxford Ionics. And the conditions, of course, were that the dual equipment, the quantum computer, was not to leave the UK. I thought that was quite, well, it's quite logical because we just passed certain legislation regarding export control. And I wish they'd done it for cryptography generally instead of in the UK. I can see a lot of instances whereby we could have developed a very, very strong ecosystem in the UK. If you look at what's coming out of Cambridge and Oxford and London, there's a ton of stuff coming out. I mean, half the time when we deal with a small company providing some new piece of hardware or software in crypto, it's either Oxford or Cambridge. There's a ton of stuff coming out of there, and developing that as an ecosystem where organizations in the UK can actually find, using the term local rather flexibly, but locally sourced, would be quite something. But they're going to struggle because I don't believe this is really supported by the government at the moment. They've supported quantum, but they haven't supported the technologies around post-quantum crypto, and that's a pity because yes, I can see the argument with quantum that they want a commercial advantage for the UK. That's fine. But they're not looking the other way and thinking, hold on, commercial advantage is great, good for British business, but what about the risks and the threats? I'd like to see more there. I mean, I wish the NCSC could be a little bit more forthright and a bit more proactive in this area. I shouldn't really complain that they've just made us a show of consultants in PQC, so they're very kind to us. But still, I really would like them to be very, very more focused on crypto in the UK or within the EU even. But the idea that organizations have a real choice at the moment. I don't want to disparage the Silicon Valley at all. But I'm saying if everything is coming out of one place, that's not choice. And building up a local ecosystem of the hardware, the software, the HSMs, the whole PKI, end to end. That's the only way you're actually going to establish any type of crypto sovereignty in this country, or even within the EU. If we don't do it, then and it's a top-down approach. You cannot do it. Organizations cannot do this by themselves. You've got to have national or international cooperation on this.
Yep. Thank you, Adrian. Yeah, excellent. Francis, I absolved myself of the sin and admission that 6 months ago I could probably work out what cryptographic agility was, but didn't really understand it. It's a question, what is it and how is it framed as a resilience capability or strategy? Again, not just a compliance one, but cryptographic agility. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure, Spencer. So I suppose cryptographic agility is the ability to be able to orchestrate and automate your different cryptographic protocols seamlessly across your different platforms. within your enterprise. And I think it's a really key strategy. And there's a lot of people starting to throw around the word crypto agility. And I'm sure it's going to become a marketing term not so far, very much like zero trust, that everyone's going to be selling you agility. But it's a strategy, and it's part of understanding what technologies underpin your cryptography. How do you orchestrate and automate those technologies in a way that's seamless and agnostic to the platforms that you're trying to target? So a lot of enterprises will be hybrid. They'll have physical data centers and they'll have an extrapolation of cloud services. You'll have data across both, of course. You may have some third party or some subsidiary type connectivity as part of those things. So how do you ensure that you can quickly change keys if compromised, that you can run hybrid algorithms with classical cryptography, etc., in a way that you can switch over? And I talked about the example of maybe the front-facing banking app earlier. If you think about services like that you have a lot of customers consuming, a lot of those customers are on either smartphones or standard laptops, etc. They can only transact with you to a certain level of cryptography. So like they may not have the physical hardware on their devices to be able to do quantum resistant algorithms. So you're going to have to run hybrid modes for a period of time. But also, as Adrian pointed to, around HSMs, and can you trust the vendor or where those HSMs sit? Have you got all your HSMs in the cloud, for instance? Are you leveraging some sort of a native service in AWS or Microsoft for underpinning your HSMs? Or have you got your physical trust on-prem, somewhere that you know where it is and that you have the playbooks and autonomy to change those keys and to interact with that software and that hardware stack as needed? And I think it's critically important when we talk about resilience. Resilience to attack, resilience to failure, and building in agility gives you a strategic advantage to go after those things. And I think a lot of people, when they start to do their cryptographic inventories, will not only find stuff they should have fixed maybe 10 or 15 years ago, but they'll also find that they've got a lot more stuff in terms of digital certificates than they thought they had, from lots of disparate vendors, some external, some internal. Maybe there's something under the desk in someone's office that's serving out certs to 10 or 15 systems. So understanding that visibility will really give you the autonomy to build out strategies to orchestrate and automate at a more efficient strategy. And it's not going to happen today or tomorrow. You're going to have to build this up over a period of time. And some systems won't be fit for purpose in terms of this. You'll need to come up with new tactics and techniques for there. I think that's where organizations will see the need to start building up centers of excellence, like cryptographic centers of excellence, where they have expertise in pockets, both architectural, cryptographic, and engineering type disciplines, that they can orchestrate and automate these technologies and manage them at scale across an enterprise. But it's not going to be an easy feat. And I think there's lots of hard conversations and lots of hard work ahead to get enterprises and industries up to the level they need to be for quantum.
Great. Yeah. This is too good to stop right now, so I'll wait for the hook on the neck. But Bryan, I guess good thing is, right, there's some standards already being published, NIST, etc. I think 4 or 5 of I guess crypto resistant algorithms or quantum resistant algorithms. Although I doubt whether they're stay resistant, so it's going to be an ongoing thing or an ongoing battle. Can you talk a little bit about cryptographic agility and how it's been incorporated into the sovereignty controls?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, Francis has some really good points there. And I think, the key word is agility. And when we look at the crypto PKI certificate authority world, it's not something that we're used to being in terms of agile from an organizational perspective. Yes, we'll have different handshakes, different levels of security, depending on, what the device connects to or is able to support. But we would never be, openly agile in that. But that's something that we have to get comfortable with doing. And, the crypto agility side, it's essential for both the national and the organizational sovereignty side. If we don't get that agility right, we'll potentially be locked into, obsolete algorithms, depending on, maybe we're depending on, suppliers that are running, obsolete protocols, etc. So it's something that we have to get comfortable doing in a PQC world. The way I look at it, if sovereignty is about control, then crypto agility is what gives you the steering wheel to actually gain that control. And that's what I speak to boards and organizations about. Without that agility, we could potentially look at vendor lock-in. We might have to do, you know, rewrites of our codes, because obviously we all know that developers love to bake in hardwired into code, you know, what the algorithms are going to be used, etc. We would have to, you know, change that in an agile world. What we don't want to end up with is security paralysis, where, you know, legacy crypto actually becomes, you know, an issue and actually makes us more vulnerable. But I don't think, you know, sovereignty is all just about controlling data. It's about, you know, maintaining that freedom of action. It gives us choice. And that's where the agility actually plays in. You know, like Adrian said, we are going to have to maintain that hybrid environment, because we're going to have devices connecting into any organization, whether it's, you know, BYOD, and obviously different devices are going to have the capability of a PQC world, you know, faster than others. So we're almost going to find ourselves in that environment that we, you know, some in financial services find ourselves in today, when you're dealing with, you know, a massive broker network where some are, you know, huge environments and obviously everything's up to date, and some are two men and their dog and everything's out of date, but we still need to transact with them. So we're going to have to be agile in terms of how we interact with each of these individual infrastructures, environment, suppliers, but obviously we need to incentivize them to move up that chain in terms of image. But I think this is, you know, we often talk about in security, secure by design, and this is another thing where agility is design. So the enterprise architects help us out here, because not only do we have to be secure by design, we have to be secure for the future. And that means modular key management, so no more hard wiring in, etc. We need to be able to be agile and change across our applications. And I think, you know, the boards are starting to recognize this. I've certainly seen funding being, you know, opened up for PQC crypto inventories. How do we do the life cycle planning? How do we start to prepare for the procurement processes to operate in this world? And, you know, that's one of the challenges that I've seen. So yes, we've talked about all the technical aspects, but, you know, supply chain is massive to any large organization or even medium organization. We all work with suppliers. So actually opening up every contract and actually start to amend these contracts to support PQC and agility, etc., that's going to be a huge issue. You know, touching what Adrian said, this isn't a small thing for enterprises to get their heads around. So hence in my earlier, you know, statement, we should start sooner rather than later, right? So back to you, Spencer.
Thank you, Bryan. Yeah, just to let everyone know, we're going to do about closing thoughts, anything I missed, etc., from the panel members, and then we go to Q&A. We've had some come in. You still have an opportunity. I think the way is through LinkedIn chat. You know, the invite came out, so back through that. Yeah, Paddy, you know, from what you've heard, any kind of thoughts or additional things you wanted to add before we go to questions?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think we've brought to life both, in a sense, the less obvious and, I don't say hidden, but the less obvious governmental drivers and geopolitical drivers, alongside, you know, the operational realities of CISOs like Bryan and Francis, who are thinking through this in terms of practically how are they going to deliver, or how they deliver at the moment, how will they deliver. And I think it's that the way in which that sovereignty aspect, the national security and resilience, will become more prominent in the operational space as the quantum capabilities come nearer, is what we need to understand. So that what we shouldn't think about is that this is static. And my view is, and we talked about boards are all having conversations about emerging technologies that impact their business, and therefore they have a kind of quantum strand. Within that, there is a strand about what does this mean for our systems and data, but frankly, there isn't the intensity in their strand that there should be yet. My view is that boards should have within their risk framework something on this quantum aspect and what it's going to do, because what we've described today, both operationally and in a national security and resilience sense, is that this is going to intensify and become a larger factor than it is at the moment. And many people, I think, are slightly working on the basis as, well, we've got a strand of work on this, that'll be fine. But this is going to expand just in the way that businesses have had to expand around the AI challenge. Over.
Thank you. Yeah, Francis, kind of closing thoughts, and I do want to just ask you, who should own this in an organization? Is it an issue for the CIO, the CISO?
I think, Spencer, that's a really interesting point, and a lot of people say crypto security, it's the CISO, but this is an organizational problem, and it affects every part of the business. So if I think about this holistically, the CISO may have to drive it in terms of oversight because naturally the skills may sit in that area, but the buy-in needs to come from the business and all of the different executives. But it needs to be top-down, bottom-up support in order for this to be successful. And I wouldn't be surprised if you started to see agencies like Moody's and others starting to link credit rating and credit worthiness to financial institutes based on their quantum readiness programs, etc. Back to that key point in trust. And I suppose just to finish off, I was talking to Dr. Michael Mosca the other day, the creator of the Mosca theorem, in terms of the amount of time we have versus the readiness of an organization. And he said something that resonated with me quite a bit. He said, it's okay to be a day early, but we can't afford to be a day late. And I think that is key here. If you get ready now, if you're prepared now, you'll get there ahead of the Q day or the quantum day, whatever we're calling it at the moment. But if the quantum relevant computer comes at a commercially viable level and you're not prepared, you're potentially leaving your business open to be goosed. Because who wants to do business with an organization they can't trust?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's okay to be a day early, but you won't be forgiven if you're a day late. Going to tattoo that one somewhere, I think. Adrian, closing thoughts or observations?
Back in 2016, you remember the AlphaGo? AlphaGo was this thing whereby there was this game that IBM had, and the computer was designed to beat this guy who was very, very good. And they didn't think the computer would do it. They thought artificial intelligence was far, but not that far. And it ended up absolutely thrashing this guy, absolutely wiping the floor with him. And the scientists afterwards said, it surprised them and worried them, because they said in one day, that science jumped 10 years. And there's a thought there, because it's not unthinkable. That's exactly what could happen in quantum computers. They could very, very easily just suddenly jump forward very fast. And then a lot of organizations will be absolutely screwed. Let's just put it straight. They'll be absolutely screwed.
Yeah, that technical term, right? Yeah. Bryan, we had a couple of really good questions from Cornhill. One made me chuckle, but thank you, Cornhill. The observation was we should know where, or companies should know where their crypto assets are. I mean, I've never worked with a CIO that knew where his servers were.
No, neither have I.
But wonderful if we can, and I 100% agree, right? That's why CISO job's so miserable, because you can't protect what you can't see. Secondly, how, again from Cornhill, thank you, how are we going to get governments, maybe Francis might want to come back on this one as well, UK in particular, to come on board and align with the new PQC standards? But closing thoughts, Bryan, and if you want to address either of those, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, two really good questions, and I've never worked in an organization that understands all of its cryptographic flows, and even if they have done a crypto assessment, it always shows up in secure handshakes and all of those aspects. So I think we talked a lot about crypto today, but actually I don't think this is a crypto problem. I think it's a bit of a leadership problem. I agree that the CISO has to take a front foot and stance, because this is it's a highly technical issue. And it's one of those where we need a good CISO that can do that translation, that Babel fish, that Rosetta Stone, and get in the board and actually say, look, this is something that you need to sit up and listen to, because this has a real impact on the entire business. I think, the quantum risk is real. And I think it's one of those few threats as security leaders where we actually know it's coming. The only thing is we just don't know exactly when. But that actually gives us a rare position to lead from the front instead of playing catch up. So, we should be focusing on this topic now. So if I was to kind of say, a call to action, I speak to CISOs and I speak to boards. So my call to action to them both is, specifically the security leaders, is, it's not to rip up and replace tomorrow. It's to start mapping your exposure today. So Cornhill, really good questions, but I disagree that every company knows their cryptographic footprint. Actually, I'd argue that most don't. I'd say that most don't actually understand their dependency on long-term cryptography. I don't think that most understand their critical keys and who manages them. I don't think that most don't understand their contracts or cloud services and where do your dependencies lie. And I think, one of the challenges is, boards are starting to ask this because it's coming top down through their regulators, but we have a lot of non-regulated entities where the conversations won't be happening. So we need the security leaders to actually, translate this and get in front of your boards and actually, do they actually know there's a shelf life on your current crypto estate? Because if not, we need to start that conversation now. And while there's still time, because, as the other speakers were saying, that timeline might shift rapidly forward by 5-10 years. And to coin a phrase, you'll be screwed, right? So back to you, Spencer.
AI is going to solve all that, Bryan. We don't.
Yeah, exactly. Game changer.
Maybe that government one, good one to come back to you, Paddy, on is how do we get the government on board with this, or do you think they are on board? UK Gov.
I think government is on board with it, and you can see them on the move, and you can see that in the way in which they've as I described, they've changed their expectation, the way in which they're expressing the expectation of quantum readiness. But I think that it's a bit like they do with cyber security or cyber resilience. So they're giving you a demand indicator, but they're not describing then what you do within your individual organizations. And we know the leadership difficulties that there are around technology and cyber issues in particular within organizations. There is a risk this just gets caught up in the same phenomenon, and in a way, Bryan was describing that just now. So I think government is very much on this. Of course, we made the AI joke just now. It's important to remember that when you look at who is dealing with these issues, you look at a ministry like Department for Science, Innovation and Technology here, you'll find that the people who are thinking quantum are also those who are charged with thinking AI. And that does mean we're going to have this kind of AI and quantum, and so we're going to get a muddle in the way that government talks about it. But government does want it, but I don't think the solutions lie with government. I think they lie in businesses, and this question of board awareness is critical. Getting people on the board to understand that this is a big wave coming to the front of the ship, and they're going to need to be prepared for it, I think is vital.
Yeah, I think, Spencer, just to add on what Paddy said there, I think, Paddy, it's very similar to other challenges that we've had. Government isn't going to come out with a blueprint of this is how you do it. This is something that we want you to do. And the real power comes in, organizations within sectors collaborating and sharing to get to that end point. That's what we've seen time and time again, right?
Yeah. The other thing, so the question we had is how can companies justify PQC, especially like board and executive management? Well, I think kind of a funny answer, but it's true. I think Paddy or any one of us is available for weddings, bar mitzvahs, etc. In terms of educating, right? Because it's an educational thing. I've certainly had to ramp up the last 6 months, as many of us have. We're not all deep into the tech space, and maybe moving to a specific question on the tech space to Adrian. We had a question that says, just how much lab work and testing is required to prepare for a migration? Just get a sense of the work. Can you speak to that? Is it?
Yeah. You're looking at for a big organization. It's. I always tell them it's at least 3 years, but I'm usually lying. It's probably going to be about 5 to 7 years. But you don't want to frighten everybody on day one, do you? But yeah, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. You especially the big organizations. Let's take the multinationals. I feel for the CISOs. They just don't know where to start. Now, I was talking to one. He resigned. Well, yeah, of course. It's just, it's such a huge and complex process. It will be years. It will probably be, at least half a decade for the really, really big organizations. yeah, it just goes back to the government advice. Start your readiness plan. Start it now. You know, there's so much to do.
Brilliant. Well, esteemed panel, Tom, Venari, we're up on time. Everyone that attended the webinar and the discussion, thank you so much. Thank you for the questions online. I wish I had the backing music if you've got a friend, but you do. You can get expert advice, technologies like Venari to help with the steps and the process and the services, etc. But I think the overarching message from this webinar was learn, educate yourself about what's coming, use the available resources, and look who can help you with this massive transformational change and take it head on. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon, morning, wherever you are in the world. And as I say, we're here and available if there's anything else you want to know. And no doubt there'll be a script or a recording of this, both video and a condensed version summary. So please just reach out to Venari and ourselves to get a copy of that. Thank you and goodbye.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you.